Good morning, and welcome to the 2023 Military Ethics Case Competition at the United States Naval Academy. This round we will hear from the Virginia Military Institute as they discuss their solution to this year's case, nipping toxic leadership in the bud. This round will proceed in two halves. First, the team will have 30 minutes to give their presentation on the topic. I will give warnings at 5 minutes and 1 minute remaining in their 30-minute presentation time. Judges will then have a few minutes to enter their scores following the criteria on page 1. We will then proceed with a 20-minute question and answer session between the judges and the team. Teams may huddle after questions if they desire, and any number of team members may respond to any question. I will give 3 and 1 minute warnings towards the end of the 20-minute Q&A portion. All judges may ask one question with follow-ups as time permits. At the end of the Q&A, judges will finalize scoring, and all scores will be turned into me before lunch. Without further ado, your 30 minutes will start when you start speaking.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for giving the Virginia Military Institute's Ethics and Debate Team the opportunity to speak at 2023's Military Ethics Case Competition. Before we get into today's case, Nipping Toxic Leadership in the Bud, the team members and I would like to take a brief moment to reintroduce ourselves. So my name is Cadet Harris Burton. I'm a first classman at Virginia Military Institute, where I'm also the CIC of VMI's Ethics and Debate Team. I studied economics and business with a minor in French there, and I am affiliated with VMI's Army ROTC program, although I am on the non-commissioning track right now.
Morning, everyone. My name is Cadet Riley Schultz. I am a second classman at the Virginia Military Institute, where I study international studies with minors in Arabic and national security, and I am the ACIC assistant cadet in charge of the VMI ethics team, and I'm an Army ROTC non-commissioned.
Good morning. I'm Cadet Riley Malone. I am a third classman at VMI, where I study history, and I'm commissioning in the Army.
Good morning, everyone. I am Cadet Gabrielle Woodward. I am a second classman at the Virginia Military Institute, pursuing a major in international studies, a minor in national security, and I'm currently on track to commission with the United States Navy.
Well, you loaded this up with two Rileys, huh?
Yes, sir.
To begin, I'm going to go ahead and define one of our key terms, toxic leadership. Toxic leaders, they have traits and characteristics that negatively impact both them, their followers, and whether or not the mission is accomplished. The three main components of toxic leadership is referred to as the dark triad. The first component is psychopathy, which is characterized by impulsiveness, being cold, remorseless, not really caring about others. The second is Machiavellianism, which is where the leader is manipulative, self-interested, and really controlling of their subordinates. The third and final component is narcissism, where you may have illusions of grandeur. It's all about me, me, me. You want to be seen as someone of authority, someone in power, overly concerned with privileges or respect and whatnot. And to talk about the toxic leadership triangle, I will hand it over to Cadet Burton.
So, toxic leadership is primarily caused by the presence of 3 elements, commonly referred to as the toxic triangle. These elements include destructive leaders who are harmful to their followers and exhibit these characteristics that Cadet Malone spoke about in the dark triad. Then we have susceptible followers. These are followers who may not have the ability to report harmful behaviors exhibited by their leader or actively go along with the harmful behaviors exhibited by their leader, depending upon the situation. And then we have the third element, which is conducive environments. These may be environments where there is an overall climate in which people feel that they're not privileged to speak up against problems that they see within the organization. Our plan that we're about to outline here for you here today seeks to eliminate all 3 components of this toxic triangle that give rise to problematic and toxic leaders. Next slide, please.
Now let's talk about our main stakeholders, people who have the most to benefit or to lose in the success or failure of this program. So first, let's talk about cadets. Cadets join our ROTC programs or the academies to gain a very beneficial career in leadership and ethics in the military. Now, their success in this is dependent a lot upon the skills and the lessons that they learn in ROTC, and we want to make sure that we set them up for the best future possible. Secondly, we have ROTC Cadet Command and ROTC programs. As you know, that many ROTC programs are very much cadet-led, and we want to make sure that the cadets who are rising up in the ranks of these ROTC programs are teaching those below them and setting the example of good leadership, as well as the ROTC commanders are giving good examples so that their program can prosper for a very long time. Next, we'll talk about universities. that these cadets are commissioning out of. When someone graduates from a university, they carry that university's brand name with them. And when they do well in the civilian field and they act in an honorable and ethical way, they create a very good name for the university. And we want to maximize that benefit for the universities that give these cadets an education. And lastly, we're going to talk about the United States military. On their graduation day or before that, when cadets raise their right hand and take the oath of office, cadets are taking up a big leadership role, and they're going to have influence over other officers as well as enlisted personnel. And the way they act to those people will define the United States military legacy. We want to make sure that we are maximizing the leadership and values that they're passing down. Next slide, please.
Up next, we want to address some of the concerns that our stakeholders may have with our program. One of which is the privacy concern. Our program will be collecting data to be used only for in-house purposes. It's not going to be exported or sent off to faraway locations. It's only for guiding, teaching, advising, and counseling these young midshipmen and cadets so that way they can grow, develop, and become the future officers of the U.S. military that we need. The second concern is perceived experimentation. This goes along anytime there's the collection of data. And in keeping with the ontology from Immanuel Kant and doing your duty to not treat people as ends or treat people as means to an ends, but as ends in and of themselves, there is no real experimentation. The only action that is occurring is the guiding and the sort of long-term conversation between the teaching element and the cadet element that allows them to grow and become the leaders that the U.S. military needs.
Now, before we go any further, we would like to give you a brief overview of the program that we have developed. First and foremost, when creating this program, we created a mission statement, which is to prevent toxic leadership through education, training, and reflection. For this program, we've come up with 3 lines of effort to include academics, training, and assurance. The academics portion of this program is set forth to incorporate both ROTC branch knowledge and leadership material in order to ensure an accurate understanding among the cadets so that they may understand how to develop this leadership. Secondly is the training line of effort. What this does is it allows situations for cadets to observe and apply the leadership skills that they learn in the academic portion. And finally is assurance. This is on 2 fronts. First, it allows the program itself to understand where it can improve and develop. And secondly, it allows cadets to see where they stand as leaders and how to develop further in the future. Next slide, please. The first line of effort is academics. As previously stated, this is the traditional in-class portion of the program to provide the necessary curriculum to understand how to develop as a leader. When creating this, we took a look at our own program at VMI, and we identified an area that we could improve upon, which is to set forth classes that are, 1, based in RTC knowledge and also based in leadership psychology. When we took a look at this from our own experience, we realized that we have about 8 required courses with ROTC, and about 4 of them go into leadership, so it would make sense to go ahead and separate them. They will be psychology-centered because we do want to recognize that in order to understand leadership, you must also understand the psychology behind influencing others. Secondly, the ROTC portion of this involves the actual core values of the military, which it to include JJ to tie buckle, the actual leadership traits that go into these core values. Next slide, please.
And now to give you a brief breakdown year by year and semester by semester of our academic program that we've outlined for our ROTC cadets. So during a year, we would like each cadet to take a ROTC related course as well as a leadership curriculum course that will enforce some of the key concerns of our program, talking about leadership, followership, and practical application of important fundamentals. So first of all, let's talk about what will be discussed in the first year of leadership curriculum within our program. The course is titled Fundamentals of Leadership. Within this program, it is going to be a lighter introductory course in which they learn the basics of leadership as well as very overarching leadership theories such as the skills approach and the trait approach of leadership. During this course, cadets will also be instructed on good followership tactics and how to be an effective listener to best support their leadership as they are first acclimating to the program. During the second year, the sophomore year, they will then go through a course called Leadership Theory. Now, the cadets are going to be taking on some more advanced theories, such as adaptive leadership, situational leadership. So these are types of leadership which they will then be able to identify in their current leadership and perhaps even replicate when they are taking on more advanced leadership roles. They're going to be gaining some more minor leadership roles within their third year or within their second year in the program. So they'll be able to see and apply these. During our third year, we're going to step things up even further with the introduction of social psychology. Psychology is a very important part of leadership, as you can identify various motivations for people working within organizations, what influences people, and develop a best practice based on the latest in psychological science. Also within this year, we would like to teach our cadets a lot of ethical theories that can go behind different leadership philosophies, such as we mentioned, deontology, coming up with a maxim and sticking with it no matter how hard it is. Then finally, we'll have our leader application course within the fourth and final year of the program. During this section, we would like our cadets to be able to look at a variety of case studies, such as that of Major Graf, analyze exactly what was happening. Why didn't it stop sooner? What would they do better in the situation, depending upon whether they were a leader, equal to Captain Graf, for example, or a follower in this situation? And so through this practical application of what they've learned in the previous 3 years, they will be able to then take that knowledge more effectively into their own future careers. And our idea for this final stage is for them to write a paper on toxic leadership and how to combat it using one of those case studies that they feel most passionate about. Next slide, please.
Now, our program as a whole would like to focus a lot on the UCMJ and how it pertains to leadership and being in the military as a whole. And while it will cover the entire UCMJ, there are a few key articles and sections that we'd like to hit on particularly. We chose these articles because they're kind of unique to the military. Right? Both the military and the civilian world say murder, stealing, things like that. They're wrong, obviously. But conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, that's something that doesn't really exist in the civilian world. And our program is also designed to help transition people from that civilian style and mindset to a military one. So understanding these and how they play into ethical principles and frameworks such as deontology are absolutely critical to becoming a good officer and leader and learning how to operate effectively in the military.
Our second line of effort involves the component of training. This has two elements to it, the field element and the garrison element. For the field element, these are opportunities for leadership and training that occur outside of the normal schedule and typically off campus. They are elements of increased intensity and stress levels, and they are an indication of leadership potential and ability in said stressful environments. These can include things such as FTX or field training, NCMT, new cadet military training, PTT, physical training, or ROTC lab courses. As for the garrison element, these again are leadership opportunities for the educational opportunities to be provided. However, they are in a non-field environment that is less stressful and allow for an assessment of durational examination. Next slide, please. A few components of these include FTX, field training, physical training, ROTC billets, and cadet-led groups. For field training exercises, this is the most common form of a stressful environment. It is about 3 to 5 days where ROTC branches will take their cadets into the field and they're allowed to actually exercise these military skills. As for physical training, this is the most common form of a training component. It happens typically on a weekly basis and it allows branches to get together and work out with each other. However, the most important skill here is followership. It allows people to realize how to lead and motivate without having a position. As for ROTC billets, this allows cadets the opportunity to see what it's like to influence, motivate, and organize other people. And the most important aspect of this is that as you progress in your cadetship, you will gain a larger responsibility. For cadet-led groups, this is closely reflected to ROTC billets. However, it does take place in a non-military setting because we do realize that leadership is not only an aspect of the military. Next slide, please. Lastly, our third line of effort goes towards insurance. This also has two components to it, the guardrail element and the assessment element. For the guardrail element, this involves regular observation on behalf of the cadet leadership, the TAC leadership, who are teaching, advising, and counseling NCOs and officers, and the ROTC command leadership. What this does is it allows these leaders to observe their cadets and understand and see where they stand pertaining to leadership. It also allows them to develop their cadets. As for the assessment element, these are self and peer assessments conducted roughly 3 times a year at the first day of classes, Christmas break, and before final exams in the spring. This allows anything missed in the guardrail element to also be assessed. The most important part of this is that it allows cadets to see where they stand, they can reflect on where they are, and they can receive guidance from their leadership. Next slide, please.
Now we're going to discuss the 360 review a little bit more. So it was discussed a little bit more on the last slide, but it's basically when you receive feedback from your peers, as well as your followers, as well as your commanders. So review from all parts of the chain of command. Now, in the research that we reviewed, 360 reviews are effective because in studies in which people were rated poorly in 360 review in a certain aspect of leadership, they then improved on months later when reevaluated on these leadership attributes. Now, a caveat to this is that the research also shows that they improved only in the aspects in which they showed an intent to improve after reviewing those leadership evaluations. So this shows the biggest important part of the 360 review is that the takeaway should be that the 360 review gives you an idea of what you need to improve, but then you have to take it upon yourself and look at yourself in the mirror, take personal accountability to see what you need to do better, and then make a decision to do better. And that's the beauty of the 360 review. Next slide, please.
Very quickly before we move on, I just want to mention that the purpose of the 360 assessment, as well as all of the other assessments that cadets go through, act as a checks and balances system, both with the program and with the cadets themselves, so they can see where they stand.
And now to introduce our program material year by year, beginning with first year one, the theme of this year being followership. Now, to introduce the purpose of year one, we are not only allowing our cadets the time to understand basic military skills such as uniform expectations, as well as acclimate to college, but most importantly, we're trying to teach them how to be great followers and even better listeners. So let's go to the academic element. So we're going to kind of ease into this, as we mentioned within the academic slides, that cadets will be introduced to basic elements of the Universal Code of Military Justice, as well as some of the fundamentals of leadership skills. But they're mostly going to be focusing on listening and learning so that they can apply these leadership skills when given a chance to in subsequent years in the program. And now to the field element. So cadets and midshipmen are going to be expected to observe their upperclassmen when going to PTT, when going to field training exercises, so that they can execute commands when given them, to learn those good followership skills, but also so they know what to do for next year when it's their turn to lead others. And then finally, for the garrison element, whether it is in the barracks or whatever living situation is applicable to the college at which this ROTC program is implemented to, cadets and midshipmen are going to be observing their underclassmen to see how are they performing with each other. What are they like when they are off camera, so to speak? So they're going to be evaluating each other and seeing how they treat each other when out of a military environment as well, whether this be clubs, living environment, or anything, any social kind of gathering the ROTC branch does. Next slide, please.
Building off that first year, which focused mainly on establishing a baseline of understanding among everyone, the second year, whose theme is learning to lead, takes it up a notch. You have sophomores who have had a year of college and experience in this ROTC program and understand those concepts, and now they're going to learn how to apply them. For the academic element, you're going to learn the psychology behind leading in organizations. You're going to learn more about the characteristics, but not only just the characteristics, you're going to learn how to apply it, which takes us into our field element. In the context of a field training exercise, which is a particularly stressful environment, you're going to learn how to deal with some of the rigors of being in command. You're going to be leading small units of, say, a fire team, a section, or a squad. In the garrison element, it's similar to the field element in that you're being in charge of small unit groups, but you're not in that tactical mindset or that branch-specific mindset. You're responsible for more of the administration, the mundane parts of being in command. You're going to be responsible for accountability, motivation during PT, and things like that. And the overall purpose of this is that cadets or midshipmen are going to be exposed to more in-depth, building upon what they learned in the previous year. They're going to take this, they're going to learn how to interact with different levels of chain of command and function as part of a team in a small unit leader capacity. Next slide.
Now to discuss the third year. So whereas the second year was about executing on a smaller level, this is about leading and coordinating on an even bigger level. So in the third year, in the academic element, in terms of the leadership class, you're going to focus on the social and psychological aspects of leadership, as well as ethical leadership, with an emphasis on Kantian ethics, which teaches that we don't treat people as a means to an end. We treat people with respect in our leadership positions. Next, in the field element, where cadets in the third year are going to have more of a planning, coordinating role. So whereas they receive the commander's intent, the mission from the fourth year students, they're going to plan out how this is going to be logistically carried out. In an example of an FTX, they're going to talk about supplies needed, time frames, things like that. And then in the garrison element, they're going to have a larger level than the squad level than what they're previously responsible for. So in the third year, they're going to be responsible for such as a platoon or even company leadership. And they're going to be responsible for what fails to happen as well as what happens in their platoon. Next slide, please.
Finally, we have come to our fourth and final year, where cadets will have an emphasis on command. The most important part about this year is that cadets are beginning to take their transition into the military, where they will commission and actually apply all of these elements into a real world situation. The purpose of this year is for cadets and midshipmen to be exposed to the psychological element of leadership as it pertains to the UCMJ, which is most important as they're finally about to transition into the field or the fleet. They will now be responsible for all organizational elements of this cadet-led program, so it is their job to set forth this mission and ensure that it occurs properly. As for the academic element, classes will now reflect an in-depth ethical and psychological base pertaining to the UCMJ, and as Cadet Burton has previously stated, they will focus on more case studies of this leadership and how to prevent toxic leadership and properly and positively influence their subordinates. As for the field element, again, they will have a larger responsibility for command and training. They will be more focused on the overall mission of this program, and they are responsible for planning and coordinating everything that happens. The garrison element is similar in this fact that they now have greater responsibility and a larger command group. Next slide, please.
And now to talk about managing risk and granting reward within the context of our cadet stakeholders in this situation. So first, let's talk about granting reward. So our program does two amazing things. First, it not only flags cadets who could potentially present a risk to the military, granted an officer position in the future, but it also gives us the opportunity to see who are our standout cadets within taking on leadership roles within an ROTC program. These high performers, as found through our 3 assessments, such as the Dark Triad assessment, as well as the leader-follower assessment, the Big 5 assessment, TAC counselings, and high performance in other training areas, will be granted extra consideration for education, training, and leadership opportunities. So these could include potentially study abroad opportunities during their cadetship, as well as internships and advanced schooling such as diving school, which is highly competitive. It can boost them so they can get those competitive slots, given that they put in the work to show that they are positive future leaders for the military. And now let's talk about mitigating risk and what our program proposes to do on that side of things. So cadets who are identified as potential risks will be brought in for counselings by their training, advising, and counseling officers, and potentially, if there is shown no attempt to improve after a series of counselings, packets can be submitted to ROTC branch command, which could potentially result in termination if the cadet displays a complete unwillingness to change, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth on our next slide. So let's talk about what happens in the event that a cadet exhibits a refusal to change and is continually exhibiting characteristics of the Dark Triad. First and foremost, the VMI team would like to state that this is a developmental program. We are by no means looking to kick people out, but rather giving them chances to improve through engagement with their tactical officers, or their training, advising, counseling officers, their command, as well as the people around them through their 360 reviews, and taking into consideration feedback. However, in the event that we see cadets that are unwilling to change, they will then be brought in by their TAC officer, who will review kind of the overall information for these cadets roughly every semester, and then bring in cadets that are starting to get red flagged for exhibiting these Dark Triad traits. Then counseling will commence every 2 weeks to see how the cadet is improving the areas that clearly need work every 2 weeks until the issue is resolved. However, if there exhibits a clear refusal and in continued complaints, this can eventually result in the TAC officer creating a packet of information that is submitted to the ROTC branch commander, consisting of assessments, 360 reviews, etc., in which the ROTC branch command can then make a joint decision about whether or not this cadet is suited for more training, or needs to be terminated from the program in its entirety. That being said, next slide.
Before we move on, with regards to the testing and assessments, we narrowed it down to 3 main tests or programs. One is the leader-member exchange. where you rotate in and out of a leadership position. The other is a dark triad test, which tests for the aforementioned dark triad traits. And the third is the Big Five personality test, in order to better identify and track those characteristics which we want to pay some particular attention to. Now let's talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of our plan with regards to calculating the probability of success. One of the big strengths in our program is that there's a large system of checks and balances. Every component of this is looking after the other. Tactical officers are going to be looking at their cadets and midshipmen and making sure that they are growing and developing as future leaders in the military. The second good strength is that everyone's involved. Everyone has buy-in on this because everyone has something to gain. The cadets are looking to improve themselves, to become better officers in the future. The cadre and staff from the ROTC command are getting to practice leadership and communication skills. The universities are getting buy-in, and it also allows for continuous training among all those stakeholders. Some of the weaknesses, however, is that this program does require a large amount of planning and tracking of information. And we can mitigate the risk of this by improving that tracking information and the coordination and the flow of information by keeping everything in-house. On the similar note, mass coordination and cooperation among different levels of command and different organizations is absolutely critical in order for this to succeed. And in order to improve this, you must have an established or improved upon flow of communication, not just up the chain of command, but down and across multiple different command levels as well.
To evaluate strengths and weaknesses further into a probability of success, we did our own evaluation of our probability of success using the FAST Project's probability of success indicator. So this here has a rubric with a possible total score of 100, and is, to break it down more briefly, it is based on clarity, flexibility, capability, and tangible evaluation of your program. Now, we score very highly in flexibility and clarity because our plan has a wide array of avenues of approach to fix poor leadership as well as build great leadership. And it's a very clear mission intent to create officers who will not display toxic leadership and who will go above and beyond the mission to be great leaders. Now, in terms of capability, we still have some work to. We didn't rate as highly as above because we haven't had, the initial testing of implementing this into a college to see exactly how far it can go. So, but once this is implemented, the number could go up, and that has to do with a lot of. There is an issue of. We need to make sure there's a lot of buy-in, a lot of people working on the same thing. But again, as Cadet Malone said, this can be addressed through a lot of coordination and communication and clarifying those lines of communication. And lastly, we score very highly in tangible evaluation, as there's multiple ways in terms of self-assessments, 360 review, and TAC officer meetings to see where cadets are in danger of being not good leaders and how we can fix that.
Just to reinforce the capability aspect, we do recognize that different RTC programs have different amounts of people, different staff, and because of that, we do recognize that theoretically this will work. However, there will need to be made adaptations with the realistic application.
And that being said, the VMI team would like to briefly provide a leadership lesson that we have each learned from going through this unique challenge presented to us by the NECC. I'd like to begin. So one thing that we do often at VMI is 360 reviews. We commonly review each other when going through new cadet training or the RAT line, and members of cadre and staff also do similar reviews of each other from all different levels of leadership. It was particularly validating for me to find out that researchers actually found that there are tangible positive effects of these reviews for the thing that I've been doing so long and many of my other team members have been doing for so long at VMI.
The lesson I've learned is that there is a plethora of people that want to see you do well, and that's your leaders, your followers, your peers, and listening to all those people and making steps to improve yourself where they feel that you're not the strongest can always benefit you. Even if the advice that they give you, it doesn't feel the best at the time, there's always steps that you can take. There's always people who you can go to for advice.
I learned that it is incredibly important to understand the capabilities and limitations of the members of your team. Without understanding that, you won't know how to effectively apply that in a mission sense, and it can negatively impact both the mission and your followers.
One of the most important things I learned is cooperation. Leadership is not something that leaves once you leave the classroom, once you leave your unit. It is evident throughout all areas of life. As such, to develop it, you have to have all aspects of a program, such as training, academics, and assurance. You have to make sure that the mission is being extended everywhere.
Next slide, please. And that being said, that concludes the VMI team's presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Judges, you'll now have a few minutes to tabulate your scores on the presentation aspect, and then we will proceed to the Q&A.
Let me see the ring.
He hasn't earned
He
his
doesn't
yet.
have one.
That's all right. Next year. Be proud of him.
Yeah, amen.
Absolutely.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is it time for questions?
Yes, I do believe so. So,
Okay.
we'll now have 20 minutes.
I'll try to be as brief as I can because I don't want to cut into you guys' time. So I'll ask, there's a series of them. First, does this program currently exist at VMI? Are you doing these things, or is this a proposal?
This does act as a proposal. When we came up with this plan, we recognized that certain elements are evident at VMI. However, there are areas where it can improve. As for the assessments, I know when I go in to speak to my RTC commanders and everything, they don't really focus on developing leadership. It's more so, are you hitting these scores? Are you doing okay? Okay, here's where you stand on your commissioning track. So there are certain elements of that are present at VMI, however, not everything, and is not focused towards preventing toxic leadership in every sense.
Is this supported by senior leadership at VMI?
I can take that. So yes, this type of program is supported by senior leadership at VMI. VMI is a bit of a unique school in that there is kind of a cadet up on the hill section of training with the rat line and so on and so forth, and then ROTC is actually separate. And so with the cadet leadership, my roommate, for example, her name is JJ Colantonio, and she is a company commander. She routinely has to do 360 reviews with the members of her company that are responsible for training the new cadets in order to evaluate how are they treating the new cadets appropriately, what are they doing well, what could they improve, things like that. So that was that type of 360 review is directly inspired by our positive experiences at VMI with the training we do there on the cadet up on the hill side of things.
Okay, so let me understand. This basically applies just to the ROTC element?
Yes, this is only for ROTC training, but we were inspired by the plethora of experiences we've
Because
had at VMI.
not all VMI graduates go into the military.
That is
right?
true.
So is in any time, suppose you all wear uniforms, right?
That is true.
Okay, so what about somebody who exhibits toxic behavior but doesn't really plan to go in the military? Why should they care how they get evaluated or anything like that? And do you even bother evaluating people like that?
So we, at VMI specifically, we do evaluate people like that. We regularly do company evaluations for cadets that are found to exhibit a track record of receiving a lot of demerits or poor behavior in general. So like, for example, company commanders as well as staff captains, if they receive reports that one of their members is exhibiting poor behavior, we'll counsel them on that behavior and try to help them correct it and give them a plan in coordination with that company's teaching, advising, counseling officer to try and correct that behavior. So for example, I'm not commissioning myself, but I'm always being evaluated by my TAC officers, I'm being evaluated by my peers, and I'm constantly being pushed to better myself in areas where I might fall short.
So one last question, guys, I promise. So you collect peer reviews, you analyze them, somebody comes up with, hey, we need to talk to this guy, we need to get him into the program, or this woman, this man, get him into the program. If they don't show any improvement, they're in ROTC, they don't show any improvement, can you just sort of kick them out of ROTC, but they still they can still stay at VMI as a cadet? Or do they get kicked out of VMI?
So, would you prefer I answer this within the context of current practice at VMI, or are you interested in the application of our program that we've talked about?
Application of your program.
Okay, so with the application of our program here today, essentially the idea is that if a cadet exhibits a refusal to change after a series of counselings and the branch commander decides that they are unfit for an officer position in the future based on the presence of those dark triad traits, they would be removed from the ROTC program, but they would still, of course, be entitled to continue out their education within their university of choice.
How does that differ from the current practice?
So, for example, current practice,
So there's not the sort of in-depth psychological self and peer assessments that we implement in our program, which is one thing we really want to hit on because we identified that as a weakness in the current program. And having that sort of your followers reviewing you, your superiors reviewing you, your peers reviewing you, that doesn't exist in our program currently. But what we designed allows that because toxic leaders, as demonstrated by the case, can slip through the current program. So by implementing that, specifically targeting and self-assessment fills that gap.
Well, it seems like a good approach, so I wish you guys well in getting that adopted.
thank you, sir.
Next,
All right,
General.
all right.
I'll close.
Okay, thanks. Could you go to your toxic leadership slide? And could you just tell me what your assumption was as to its foundation or basis? Was it psychologically based, socially, educationally, intellectually, or it depended on which of those three elements you developed your company your program to do?
So I can tackle this one. So we've focused primarily on the toxic triangle, which evaluates the ability of the environment to cause toxic leaders. And so when you're creating a program such as ours, what we have the ability to change within the ROTC program is the environment. We can't necessarily go back in time and fix someone's childhood or something like that, but we can try to create the best sort of environment to flag people who are at risk for these three traits within the ROTC environment. And the toxic triangle looks at the leader themselves, their environment, and the followers within a specific place. And so our entire program was focused on erasing those three sides of the triangle by having the leader be able to be held accountable through reviews, by making sure the environment isn't conducive. It's an environment where people aren't afraid to say, hey, in my 360 review, I found that this cadet was maybe harassing someone or needs to be talked to about this behavior they're exhibiting. And then also followers, on the other hand, are empowered to kind of speak up and question things, and they're given the tools they need within that academic program to identify different types of leadership they see and know when something's going wrong.
Okay.
And to, sorry,
Go ahead.
to add on that, sir, that's the importance of our checks and balances that Cadet Weber was talking about. We're creating an environment in which we're looking for certain aspects that might be harmful to a cadet's future or those in like the platoon, their company in the future. We're creating an environment in which we're saying, hey, we're going to address that. We're not calling you a bad person. We're going to address that. We're going to help you get better.
Okay, one more question and a comment. So, all of you eventually are going to be senior. What's the responsibility of senior people to prevent toxic leadership, and what are a couple tools in your toolbox to do that?
So as a senior, it's very put on, well, at the current program and in this program, that the senior cadets are in charge of initiating this program and making sure that everybody who's still growing has the opportunity to be assessed. Me personally, it correlates with this program, but when I'm a senior, I am a mentor to a freshman. I'm going to be able to make sure that she's doing okay. If she has problems, I can help her. I can teach her how to navigate these situations. Furthermore, there are different organizations here, so you have ranked people who will be able to command this, make sure that the environment is allowed people to have these opportunities, and essentially you are a mentor, and you are allowed to lead people and make sure that they understand what's going on. You want to touch on it a bit?
So in the context of this, we hit a little bit with deontology and Immanuel Kant's framework, but it's really, really important when you're a senior leader. When you're in charge, you have a duty. Everyone has a duty to the mission, to the organization, but once you are placed in a position of command and authority, you have a duty to take care of your followers. in the context of accomplishing the mission as well. And with this, some of the tools you have is just supporting the system, supporting the program, talking to your people if problems arise, trying to figure out the route, the origin of that problem, and coming up with common solutions with them to fix it.
Very good. I was going to say circulation, and as Mike said, management by leadership and walking around, talking to your people, communication. Is just a comment. This would apply to people going into business. Business
Absolutely.
leadership is crying for VMI good leaders. They're crying for it. So your product is a VMI graduate. I can't see why this wouldn't apply across all, not just the military, but your program wouldn't apply to those that are not on the commissioning track as well.
We did recognize that leadership is everywhere, not only in the military, and we need to create people who can lead in business and the civilian world everywhere.
But it should be everywhere.
Should be everywhere, yes, sir.
Go ahead. All right. 2 questions, that's all I'm going to ask. 1, you've identified the toxic leadership traits, or some of them. Can you envision, or have you read, or are you aware of a toxic leadership trait that was useful in an operational situation?
So I can personally speak on this. Everyone at VMI is always in unique leadership situations. Actually, everyone here has a leadership position outside of this team at VMI in which they're constantly seeing these different traits. Sometimes, speaking from personal experience, sometimes being emotionally distant, which can be a bad thing under psychology, can also potentially be used to be a good thing, because sometimes there are certain leadership situations where you need to remain composed, but it's about kind of monitoring that balance of knowing when you're taking it too far and when you're hurting people. So for example, if you have a service member that comes up to you and tells you about a family tragedy and they want your advice, being emotionally cold, definitely probably not the best response in that situation. But let's say that you are in an extremely stressful combat situation and there's a lot of crazy things going on at the moment in time, and you need to be kind of resilient, show calmness, even though on the inside you might be scared. You have to put up that front to show your service members that they're expected to act rationally and do the best thing for the mission at that time. I can speak from my own example at VMI, even though this does not compare to military experience. I'm in charge of our 24-hour guard team, and that means that I am working as the person in charge of our 28-member guard team during Hell Week, in which there are constantly rats being injured. They need to get to the hospital. So I'll have situations in which several people will be injured at the same time, and I need to direct the guard team to go help those rats, remove certain barriers so that ambulances can get through, open certain doors so rats can have access to their medication and their things when going to the hospital. And I have to remain calm during all of that, even if I might be personally scared for the rats, I might know them. I have to maintain a front in order to get things done.
And sir, if I could,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I could add on that, I think a lot of our program is about making sure that good traits don't turn into bad traits, right? It's great to be confident, but we want to make sure that confidence doesn't turn into narcissism, right? It's good to look out for your people and those that you care about, but we want to make sure that doesn't turn into Machiavellianism, where you're only helping out your friends and those people who you like. And it's always good to be calm and to not have outbursts of anger, but you don't want to be psychopathic and be emotionally cold towards people. So it's having a good trait, but making sure those good traits don't turn into bad traits of power.
One of my lieutenants once asked us a question our first year when we were learning about leadership. He said, what do you do if you know that there is a leak at the bottom of the hole and you need to send someone down there but know that you can't get them back up? That's a decision that a leader will have to make. And in that situation, they have to use their superiority a little bit. They have to be emotional, a little bit cold, and they have to say, hey, for the betterment of the group, I need you to do this. And in that situations, it might be easier to use these traits. However, it is important to recognize that there are situations where they might be helpful, but they should not be the go-to.
Converse to that, you've studied all the bad leadership. Now, can you cite the attributes of good leadership that you've seen exemplified at VMI that you would try to absorb yourself? Because I'm sitting here, I know all the West Point, I know the Air Force, I know the Navy, so.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Did you want to go
Please
first?
go ahead.
All right. So what I do at VMI is I do basically accountability stuff, formation accountability. And when I was a corporal, so a sophomore was my first year doing that stuff. I really looked up to one of my lieutenants because I never felt as though he acted, narcissistic or anything like that. I knew I could always go to him for anything, and he was always more than willing to be someone to like be reassuring and something like that. He never exhibited any of these traits. So I think the biggest leadership lesson I've learned in general is humility, right? Always be someone that this shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't. So that shouldn't matter when it comes to people coming to you for help and advice. And that's the biggest leadership lesson I've learned.
So I think one of the great strengths of VMI is that we take all the other service academies, what they got right, and we try to combine it. One of my best friends is in Marine ROTC, so he's always, honor, courage, commitment all the time. And then I have another friend, including myself, and him and I are in Army ROTC, and we're always being harped on the leadership acronym, all the characteristics that the Army looks for. And you have kind of that melting pot of the good from each service while being able to collectively identify what you don't want to be like. And in the unique environment of VMI, I think that's a really great asset to have.
My company has a TAC NCO. He's a Marine Sergeant Major, and every single person at VMI respects him. He is the embodiment of the leadership traits found in the Marine Corps. He has unrivaled bearing, he's unselfish, he is humble, he is everything that we need in a person who's giving us guidance. So I know I will go to him if I have questions. I will respect anything that he tells me, even if it seems that it might not be what I want to hear, but it's what I need to hear. And his opinion is what I respect, and I will always listen to him because he portrays the good traits in a leader that make me want to respect him.
I like to keep it simple with the golden rule. Don't treat others the way you want to be treated, and also don't tell someone to do something that you cannot do or are unable to do. So I really look for that reciprocity in a relationship, and whenever there is a hard task to do, I'm not going to. Riley's actually technically is my sergeant in S1 staff, where I'm a lieutenant in the VMI Corps cadet. I'm gonna be like, hey Riley, go do this thing, and then I go out down to a local restaurant and hang out with my friends. I'm always gonna be right there with my guys. I don't want to ever make them think that I'm better than them just because my triangle is bigger than their triangle.
Okay, last question. Great program. What do you think? What are the steps necessary to implement? Coming up with it is one thing, but and you said this is not everything you're talking about is in your program. What's it take to get there?
I think one of the biggest things is coordination and buy-in. First and foremost, you have to have everyone involved in this program willing to implement it. They have to understand the mission. Also coordination, which is, in our program that's similar, we still struggle with this, and it's going to be something that other schools will also struggle with. Being able to have cadet leadership and TAC officers and Corps of Cadet leadership and unit leadership all coordinating together in order to provide that care for their cadets.
Yeah, I have something to add to that. So in terms of implementing this on a national level, getting this across, it's like just about utilizing the chain of command, right? Go to your PMS at your local, at your university and say, this is an idea that we have. This would be beneficial to Army ROTC in general as it stands. And we're teaching cadets great squad leader tactics, platoon leader tactics, but what are we teaching them in terms of leadership ethics and sociology? And they'll probably most likely buy into that as it can really benefit the program and take it up the chain of command.
3 minutes.
Furthermore, other programs may not have the vaster range of materials that we have at VMI, so they may have a smaller core, they may have less leadership, and therefore it'll be harder for them to, do the things that we've imagined you would be able to do at a university. However, that's one of the things we've looked into with our probability of success, that it would need to be adapted per school so that they can still put forth the mission with the materials that they have.
Just out of curiosity, you said one of the things you have to do is to get the buy-in from a whole bunch of people. What's your sense of that? Are the people that are there now in those positions willing to take this on?
Yeah.
So I think
There's no bad answer in this, but
among the active duty cadre who at least work in the Army department at our school, they're very motivated and willing to help, and they want, because looking at my classmates and I, we're the future of the U.S. Army. All right, in a couple of years, most of us are going to be lieutenants with actual power and responsibility. And they have a vested interest, and they're great at expressing how much they care about us. Sometimes, the school or maybe the cadets themselves fail to grasp the enormity of the responsibility we're going to have in a few years. And I think involving more, like we talked about, staff studies, staff rides, and case studies, would do a better job of telling people and convincing them, hey, this is about to get real. Stuff happens if you mess up.
I, for one, have never experienced a lieutenant who did not care about the midshipmen in the NRCC program at VMI. Every single one of them checks in, they remember about you, they will counsel you 1 to 2 times a semester, and they're looking to make sure that you're ready. On the Corps Cadet side in barracks, it's the same way. All of our TAC officers will ask about you, they'll have a conversation with you, make sure that you're okay. I have seen on the cadet side a little bit less buy-in, but every single one understands what they get into when they sign their contract or they matriculate, and they're ready to do so.
Mike, I think this is worthy of a pitch to your alumni. You need the equivalent of a class of 64 that's willing to take and fund and help implement this.
Yeah, it's a good program.
It's a good program. And
The hardest part is that there's an inherent willingness to, I've done it that way all my life, you know, and some of those guys are very senior. Your Marine has done it a certain way, and he's very good, no question about that. But you're rocking his boat. And so getting this implemented is going to be a very interesting process, very worthwhile. Don't get me wrong.
But your alumni that
Yeah.
that want to see VMI improve and
Lead the
across both military and civilian, the product that's presented, this is great work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And that is time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.